They had been fighting for 79 hours without rotation when the last Sherman in Lieutenant Daniel Mercer's platoon died under him. One moment, the tank was shuddering forward through the chalky French haze, its tracks grinding up divots of summer-stiff earth. The next, a cone of incandescent light slammed through the frontal armor like the fist of an angry god. The explosion peeled the turret open with a metallic scream that Mercer felt more than heard. He remembered the sensation of being weightless, absurdly, beautifully weightless, floating inside the tank as if unshackled from gravity before slamming back down onto the buckled steel floor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The war was never quiet, but for several seconds after the hit, the world around him muted into a pale, trembling hum. His gunner, Hale, lay against the breech, unmoving. The loader, Bennett, clutched his leg, staring at the blood pumping through his fingers with an almost detached puzzlement, as though someone had painted him with the wrong color, and he hadn't yet decided whether to complain. The crew stumbled out of the disabled tank, half crawling, half falling, gasping through the smoke. Behind them, the turret fire crackled and spat like a beast protesting its own death. Mercer's last thought, before the medics reached them, was an oddly mundane one. There goes number 5. 5th Sherman in 2.5 weeks. 5th, home destroyed. 5th steel coffin, escaped by miracle or by math. Across the valley, the German gunners watched the fireball with a satisfaction that was instinctive and grim. They had been promised that American armor would eventually break, by fear, by losses, by common sense. They were told each Sherman burned the same, cooked off the same, died the same. But what unsettled them was not the destruction. It was what happened next, and what kept happening over and over, because the Shermans always came back. And the morning after Mercer's tank brewed up, while he lay in a field hospital tent listening to Bennett try to make jokes through a morphine fog, a new batch of Shermans arrived by rail. Fresh olive drab, fresh engines, fresh tracks, still stiff from factory heat treatment. Crews were already clambering onto them before the locomotives hissed to a stop. Some tanks even rolled onto their transport trucks under their own power. 15 minutes after unloading, engines burbling like eager horses. 14 days, 500 replacements. Mercer heard the number only in rumor at first. Then he heard it from a captain, then a major. By the time the battalion commander confirmed it, 500 delivered to the front. Not promised, delivered. Even Mercer's hardened cynicism gave way to something like awe. But the awe was nothing compared to the confusion, even disbelief, that rippled through the German armored command when their scouts reported the same thing. The Americans were replacing tanks faster than the Germans could destroy them, faster than they could count them, faster than any sane nation should have been able to build them. It was as if the Allied factories were not factories at all, but some colossal spring beneath the Atlantic, spitting out Shermans every time the Wehrmacht pushed them down. Back in the field hospital, Mercer recovered just enough to be told he'd be returning to the line as soon as he could stand without vomiting. There were too few experienced tank commanders left to allow luxury. The replacements arrived with the tanks, but they needed instructors, mentors, men who knew what panic looked like inside a turret, men who understood how to breathe when the first AP round clanged against armor. When Mercer first limped into the motor pool and saw rows of Shermans stretching farther than the hedgerows, he stopped, uncertain whether he was hallucinating again. Tanks, brand new tanks, lined the dirt like a metallic harvest. The paint on their hulls glistened as though still drying. Crews circled them, running hands along the armor, tapping track pins, murmuring to themselves like parishioners touching relics. "You're Mercer?" a logistics sergeant asked, thrusting a clipboard toward him without looking up. "Sign here. Your new tank is inbound." "Inbound from where?" Mercer blinked. The sergeant barked a laugh. "The warehouse. Came off the rail last night. Pre-checked, engines run, optics zeroed. I pulled a favor. She's a beauty. Try not to get her killed this time." Mercer bristled at that until he realized the sergeant's tone wasn't mocking. It was weary. They had all stopped pretending the Shermans would survive long. The trick of the war was not to keep one tank alive. The trick was to keep the crew alive long enough to move to the next. On the German side of the valley, rumors flourished. Some insisted the Americans had secretly mobilized entire automobile factories for the war effort. Thousands of workers producing tanks the way they once produced family sedans. Others whispered about assembly lines timed so precisely that a tank rolled off every hour, day and night, without pause. More extreme stories claimed the Americans were so flush with resources that they didn't bother repairing damaged tanks. They simply abandoned them, then sent 10 more in their place. For some Panzer crews, particularly the veterans, these tales were propaganda, comforting exaggerations meant to justify retreats. But for the younger gunners and loaders, the stories gnawed at them. They had never seen an enemy appear to multiply after every battle. If they won a skirmish, the next morning brought twice as many Shermans. If they destroyed a platoon, a company arrived the following day. If they burned a company, a battalion appeared before sundown, engines rumbling like judgment. It was during one such fog-smothered morning that Oberleutnant Friedrich Seidel studied his map beneath the shade of a splintered oak. His men were veterans, blooded, exhausted, proud. They had spent the last week stalking American armor like wolves, striking from hedgerow gaps, withdrawing before artillery could lock onto them. But now reports came in faster than he could process them. Another column sighted near the ridge. Shermans approaching from the south road. More advancing through the village ruins. Seidel rubbed his temples. How many? He asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Dozens, sir. The scout swallowed. Maybe more. At his feet, the map trembled in a faint breeze, or perhaps it trembled because his hands were shaking. Across the valley, Lieutenant Mercer was climbing into the turret of his new tank, the sixth home he'd known in less than a month. New engine smell, new paint, new periscope luster. A new world, squeezed into steel walls, barely thicker than a man's arm. He ran his palm along the breech as though reacquainting himself with an old friend in unfamiliar clothing. His new loader was a kid named Caruso, 19, barely old enough to shave. His driver, Kellen, was a transfer from a unit that had lost 4 out of 5 crews overnight. Only Hale was returning from the previous tank, bandaged, limping, but alive. "You ready, Lieutenant?" Hale asked, sliding into the gunner's seat. Mercer hesitated. He thought about Bennett, back in the hospital tent, leg stitched, career finished. He thought about the wreckage of his last tank still smoking somewhere behind the lines. Then he looked out across the motor pool, taking in the impossible sight of fresh tanks idling like cattle before a storm. "As ready as they are," Mercer said. Their tank rumbled into formation. Engines growled in uneven harmony as rows of Shermans swung into columns. Dust plumed under the tracks. Above, the sky churned with low clouds the color of bruised bone. They moved out before noon. Seidel's Panzers waited behind a shattered stone farmhouse. The smell of diesel and old mud clung to everything. His gunner, Hauer, adjusted his sighting optic again and again, rubbing the lens with the corner of his uniform as though hoping clarity might bring courage. "They're coming," Hauer whispered. At first, Seidel saw only the tops of hedgerows trembling. Then the silhouettes appeared. Shermans, dozens of them, advancing in steady rhythm. No hesitation, no scrambling. They looked, Seidel realized, like a mechanized tide, a single unified force rolling forward with the confidence of inevitability. For a moment, he wondered if the rumors were not so exaggerated after all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first American shells howled overhead, shrieking as they carved through branches. German guns answered. Smoke blossomed. The valley shook. Panzers shifted positions, firing, withdrawing, firing again. The Shermans advanced, even as they burned, rolling forward in disciplined waves, like infantry who had learned not to fear their own mortality. Mercer's tank jolted as a near miss threw soil high over the turret. Hale barked a correction. Mercer relayed it, and the next round, sent a spurt of flame from behind a hedgerow where a Panzer had been lurking. The battlefield dissolved into smoke and silhouettes. Nothing was real except the grinding of the tracks beneath them and the thundering pulse in Mercer's ears. When the German line finally began to waver, it wasn't because they lacked bravery. It was because they lacked the one resource that America now wielded like a weapon: abundance. Seidel ordered a fighting withdrawal. Another shell streaked past. Another Sherman crested the hill. Another and another. The Germans moved like hunted animals, no longer certain of their place in the food chain. As they retreated through the churned earth, Seidel shouted to his men, urging them toward new positions. But beneath his fury, another emotion crept in, something he had never felt in all his years fighting: bewilderment. "They replaced them," he breathed. "Everyone we destroyed. They replaced them." In the late afternoon, as the Americans secured the smoking valley, Mercer stepped out of his tank and breathed air that tasted of cordite, dirt, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. His legs trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that they were still attached to his body. Kellen climbed out and sat heavily on the track. "Sir," he said, voice ragged, "I think I finally understand the secret." "What secret?" Mercer asked. "How they expect us to fight, how they expect us to win." Kellen looked out over the Shermans, some burning, some pocked with impacts, others still idling as if fresh from the factory. "They're counting on us outliving the steel." Mercer didn't answer, because he knew it was true. The tanks were tools, replaceable, countless. The crews were the real investment. As night fell, the horizon glowed with distant fires. Somewhere out there, German crews were regrouping, whispering to one another about the impossible American machines that rose from their own ashes. Back at the American bivouac, mechanics already swarmed the surviving Shermans, patching armor plates, checking engines, replacing road wheels. Supply trucks, offloaded crates, track links, fuel, oil, everything needed to keep an army of steel moving. And tomorrow, Mercer knew, more tanks would arrive, more replacements, more steel bodies. For the men who survived, another day inside them. He lay under the stars, sleep clawing at him. There were no birds, no insects, no sounds except distant engines humming somewhere beyond the dark. The hum grew louder until it sounded almost like a lullaby, a mechanical heartbeat pulsing across the continent, born of factories thousands of miles away. It was then he understood the truth the Germans had sensed first. America didn't simply build tanks. It built momentum, a momentum so vast it distorted the rhythm of war itself, bending time, bending logistics, bending the German calculus, a momentum rooted in factories whose lights never dimmed, in assembly lines where workers moved with the precision of metronomes, in a national engine that refused to stall. In that moment, Mercer no longer saw the Shermans as machines. He saw them as echoes. Echoes of a distant industrial colossus pushing its will across the ocean, and he was one of the small, fragile humans tasked with carrying that echo into the fire. Tomorrow, the war would continue. Tomorrow, the steel would burn again. Tomorrow, new steel would take its place. But tonight, for a few trembling hours, the valley was quiet. And in the quiet, Mercer allowed himself to believe, not in victory, not yet, but in the astonishing, impossible truth that had carried him through hell and back. They would not run out of tanks before they ran out of men determined to fight inside them. The rain arrived before dawn, a thin silver veil falling across the battered valley. It softened the burn scars in the soil and turned the craters into shallow pools that reflected the pale morning light. Lieutenant Mercer woke to the sound of droplets tapping against the hull of his Sherman, his 6th Sherman. And for a moment he couldn't remember where he was. War did that. It stole the calendar page by page, until all that remained was the next mission. He wiped condensation from his eyes and pushed himself upright, joints groaning. Around him, the camp stirred. Drivers cursed as they coaxed cold engines to life. Medics moved quietly between tents. The cooks ladled out watery steel-grey coffee to men whose faces had lost the geometry of youth and taken on the gaunt, sharp angles of experience. A runner found Mercer before he finished dressing. "Orders from battalion, sir. Briefing at 0500. Mercer nodded, suppressing a sigh. "We moving out again?" "Yes, sir, and there's talk about heavy German armor ahead, Panthers, maybe even Tigers." Mercer absorbed that in silence. The rain felt suddenly colder. Inside the makeshift operations tent, a single lantern glowed atop a map that had been expanded so many times it now covered 2 tables lashed together with straps. The battalion CO, Colonel Donnelly, stood hunched over it, tapping a pencil against a cluster of red circles that marked enemy sightings. "These are probe reports from yesterday afternoon," Donnelly said as his officers gathered around. "German armor pulled back, but not far. They're consolidating. Panzer grenadiers are digging in around the ridgeline, and we have reason to believe a Tiger company was sent to support them." Several officers exchanged grim looks. Donnelly continued, "Our job isn't to charge them head-on. Our job is to keep moving. Fast. They can't match our numbers, and they sure as hell can't match our replacements. We stay mobile, apply pressure, and force them to relocate. Every mile they move pulls fuel out of their tanks and time off their clocks." He paused, letting the meaning sink in. "This war's math is on our side, but that doesn't mean the fighting will be gentle." As the meeting broke up, Mercer lingered, staring at the red marks on the map. Tigers. Even one Tiger could chew through an entire platoon if handled right. If handled wrong, it could chew through a battalion. "Lieutenant," Donnelly said quietly, moving beside him, "you're one of the few commanders we have left with more experience than tanks. Keep your boys alive. That's the real mission." Mercer nodded. "Yes, sir." Outside, the rain thickened. It drummed against the Shermans in a steady rhythm. Soft, relentless, hypnotic. Mercer found Hale adjusting the gun sight, cursing under his breath as raindrops spotted the optic. "Panthers and Tigers ahead," Mercer said. Hale snorted. "Couldn't they throw in a couple of mythical dragons too? You know, for atmosphere." Caruso and Kellen laughed, but the laughter was thin, brittle around the edges. Mercer could see the fear in their eyes, though they tried to hide it behind forced bravado. By mid-morning, the column moved out. Mud cascaded off the tracks as they churned through the saturated ground. Trees passed in blurred streaks of green and brown. Rainwater trickled down Mercer's neck, soaking his collar. Inside the turret, it smelled like wet canvas and gun oil. They advanced along a narrow road flanked by hedgerows that had become infamous across France, natural fortifications that hid German guns like wolves in tall grass. Every bend felt like the mouth of an unseen beast. Every intersection felt like the edge of an ambush. Mercer scanned the periscope, alert for the glint of steel or the shadow of a concealed muzzle. 3 miles in, the column halted abruptly. "Roadblock?" Mercer asked over the radio. "Negative," came the reply. "Scouts spotted something ahead, sending a recon jeep forward now." Minutes passed. Then the radio crackled with static and panic. "Contact, contact, heavy German armor, multiple units, Panthers at least 2, maybe more." Gunfire erupted in the distance. "Sherman column, advance, support the recon." Donnelly's voice barked through the radio. Mercer felt his stomach tighten. "Driver forward. Keep to the right side of the road. Keep us hull down as best you can." Kellen gunned the engine. The Sherman lurched forward, mud spraying from the tracks. Mercer braced his hand on the turret ring as Hale swung the gun left and right, searching for a target. Then he saw it, a Panther turret rising behind a hedgerow, its long, predatory gun barrel emerging from the leaves like the snout of a hunting cat. "Target!" Hale yelled. The Panther fired first. The shell shrieked past them and slammed into the tank behind Mercer's, erupting in a plume of fire. The shockwave rocked their Sherman. Someone screamed over the intercom. Mercer couldn't tell who. "Hale, take the shot!" The Sherman cannon boomed. The recoil kicked through Mercer's ribs. Smoke filled the turret. The round struck the Panther's gun mantelet, sparking violently but failing to penetrate. The Panther rotated its turret toward them. "Driver, reverse! Get us behind the embankment." Kellen didn't hesitate. The Sherman jolted backward, tracks grinding against mud and stone as the Panther fired again. The second German shell hit inches above where their hull had been. Dirt and leaves erupted in a chaotic spray. "Load AP!" Mercer shouted. Caruso rammed the shell home, hands shaking. "Up!" Caruso yelled. Mercer waited until they were in a shallow depression on the roadside, just low enough to conceal their hull. "Hale, aim for the lower glacis. Send it." Hale adjusted the elevation, exhaled hard, and pulled the trigger. The Sherman roared again. This shot struck true. The Panther shuddered, its front armor dented inward, a violent spasm of steel and fire bursting from the impact. The tank's left track snapped, flinging metal links into the air. Smoke spilled from the engine compartment. "Hit!" Hale shouted. But the Panther wasn't dead. Its turret continued to turn, slow, angry, deliberate. Mercer felt a prickle of dread crawl up his spine. Before the Panther could fire, another Sherman in the column unleashed a flank shot. A plume of orange flame burst from the German tank's turret ring. The Panther lurched, froze, then slumped like a dying animal. Silence followed, broken only by rain hissing against hot metal. "Panther's out," someone called over the radio. But the victory was brief. Tiger on the ridge, grid 5-9, moving to intercept." Mercer's heart hammered. Tigers didn't hide behind hedgerows. They didn't need to. The Tiger appeared like a giant rising from the earth, its 80 mm gun scanning the valley with cold mathematical precision. Its armor looked thick enough to stop time itself. The beast advanced steadily, its treads crushing the wet soil into submission. "Sir," Kellen whispered, "we can't fight that." Mercer swallowed. "We can't fight it alone." The Tiger fired. The shell struck a Sherman 50 yards ahead, punching through it as though the tank were made of wax. The explosion tore the turret from its mount. Flames engulfed the wreck instantly. Hale cursed under his breath. Caruso's breathing came fast and erratic. Mercer felt the same terror clawing at his own insides, but he pushed it down. "Driver," he said quietly, "get us moving. Slow. Keep to the slopes. Make us hard to hit." Their Sherman crawled along the shallow embankment, weaving unpredictably. The Tiger tracked them, turret rotating with mechanical confidence. Mercer's radio crackled again. "All units, converge fire, use smoke, flank if possible." White smoke erupted across the valley as Shermans fired canister rounds to obscure the Tiger's sightline. But Mercer knew smoke was a thin prayer against the Tiger's disciplined crew. "Hale," Mercer said, "we're going to get close." Hale turned his head, stunned. "Close? Inside 300 yards. Lieutenant, at 300 yards we can see what brand of cigarettes the gunner's smoking." "Exactly, and they can't depress their gunners fast at close range. We stay low, stay fast, and hit the turret ring." Caruso muttered something that sounded like a prayer. Kellen accelerated. Mud flew from the tracks. The Tiger swung its turret toward them, but the smoke disrupted its aim. A shell roared past, close enough for Mercer to feel the shock in his teeth. 200 yards, Mercer shouted. The Tiger emerged through the thinning haze, enormous, unbreakable, ancient like some mythic beast the earth had spat out to challenge mortals. "Lower, lower, steady," Mercer breathed. "Hail, fire!" The Sherman's cannon thundered. The shells struck the Tiger's turret ring, sparking violently. The Tiger lurched, but did not die. The monstrous turret continued to turn toward them, slowly, implacably. "Reload!" Mercer yelled. Caruso slammed another round into the breach. The Tiger fired, the valley lit with blinding fire. But the shot missed wide, thrown off by the smoke and the slippery ground beneath its tracks. "Hail! Again!" Another American shell smashed into the Tiger's flank. A second Sherman joined the assault, then a third. Armor-piercing rounds hammered the Tiger from multiple angles. The great beast shuddered, armor cracking. Flames licked from a newly formed breach near the engine compartment. Then, with a sound like the earth itself breaking, the Tiger exploded. The blast shook the ground. Debris rained down like black snow. The Tiger's turret lifted several feet into the air before crashing sideways, rolling once, then settling in a crooked, humiliating sprawl. The valley went quiet. For a long moment, Mercer could only hear the rain. Hale exhaled shakily. Caruso slumped against the ammo rack, sobbing in relief. Kellen whispered, "Holy God, we killed it!" But Mercer wasn't celebrating. He stared at the burning Tiger, watching the fire reflect in the pools of rainwater. He knew what that explosion meant to the Germans, watching from the next ridge. They had thrown one of their strongest weapons onto the field, and the Americans had drowned it in numbers, in momentum, in steel that did not stop coming. As the column reorganized, medics and recovery crews rushed forward. The sky was beginning to clear, the rain thinning into a mist. Smoke curled upward like dark ribbons against the pale morning. Mercer climbed out of his Sherman. He felt old, older than his years, older than the tank, older than the war. But he was alive. Behind him, new replacement Shermans rumbled over the ridge, engines fresh, armor unscarred. Mercer watched them approach, their silhouettes emerging through the mist like a promise or a warning. To the enemy, it didn't matter how many Shermans they destroyed. The Americans would simply send more, and every new tank carried a crew that refused to yield. The valley had fallen silent, but the calm was fragile, deceptive. Mercer stood on the ridge, rain still dripping from his helmet, staring at the cratered road below. Smoke from the destroyed Tiger curled upward, twisting in the wind, and he imagined the German crews inside, their faces frozen in disbelief, cursing the fates that had thrown them against his men. War had a way of making monsters tangible, and heroes too, but both came at the cost of too many lives. The column regrouped, engines idling, as Donnelly's voice crackled over the radio. "Good work, all units, but don't get complacent. Intelligence suggests another battalion moving from the east. They're aiming to cut off our supply line. Recon, confirm movement. Keep eyes sharp." Mercer's stomach tightened. The math of war was cruel. Every victory created another challenge. Every Tiger destroyed invited two more. Every mile gained required 10 times the effort. He turned to Hale, whose hands were still trembling from the Tiger encounter. "You all right?" Mercer asked. Hale wiped soot from his face. I think so, sir. Just keep them coming, huh?" "Yeah," Mercer muttered, trying to smile but failing. "Just keep them coming." They moved again, Shermans crawling along muddy roads, skirting bombed-out farmhouses and shattered hedgerows. Mercer's mind wandered for a moment to home, to the quiet streets he had left months ago. The contrast was unbearable, a world of green lawns and laughter, now replaced by craters, fire, and endless waiting for the next volley. By late afternoon, the recon scouts returned with grim news. German infantry, supported by several lighter tanks, was advancing rapidly from the east. If they reached the supply depot, the battalion could be cut off entirely. "Set up defensive positions," Donnelly ordered. "Shermans on the high ground, infantry in the hedgerows, mortars on standby. Make them pay for every step." Mercer's unit moved into position, engines growling as they climbed a ridge overlooking a narrow valley that served as a natural choke point. The mud sucked at the tracks, slowing progress, but they persevered. Men dismounted where possible, taking cover behind debris and hedgerows. Rain had ceased, leaving the world damp and heavy, but the smell of wet earth and burning oil hung thickly. And the first German scouts appeared at dusk, moving cautiously along the valley floor. Mercer could see their silhouettes, young men with rigid backs, carrying rifles heavier than their hopes, while light armor and half-tracks crept behind. They didn't know what lay in wait. "Hold fire," Mercer whispered into his radio. "Let them come closer. Patience." The Germans moved slowly, confident, unaware that the ridge above concealed a dozen Shermans and nearly twice as many men, all ready to unleash chaos. A half-track rounded a bend, the engine whining against the mud. Mercer's finger hovered over the trigger, a single glance at Hale, at Caruso, at Kellen, and they understood. "Fire!" Mercer shouted. The valley erupted, Cannons thundered, shells screamed through the air, and the half-track was obliterated before it could fire. Infantry scattered, bullets ricocheting off trees and sodden earth. Mercer watched as a squad tried to flank their position, only to be cut down by concentrated machine gun fire from Shermans and supporting infantry. Amid the chaos, Mercer spotted a lone German officer attempting to regroup his men. He was waving his pistol, shouting orders that were lost to the cacophony. Mercer thought of himself reflected in that figure, a young man caught in circumstances that demanded more than courage. But there was no pause for reflection in battle, only action. A Panzer IV emerged from the mist, trying to provide cover for retreating infantry. Mercer's heart pounded. Another tank, another challenge. Hale loaded the cannon with precision, sweat and grime streaking his face. The Sherman roared again, the shell striking the Panzer's turret, sending it spinning into a ditch. Caruso whooped with exhilaration, a fleeting, raw expression of relief that Mercer didn't dare join. Victory here was temporary. Survival was the only prize that mattered. By nightfall, the German advance had been broken. Survivors retreated into the shadows, leaving the valley strewn with wreckage. Mercer walked among the smouldering remains, the ground slick beneath his boots. The bodies of men and machines lay together, indistinguishable in death, victims of a war that refused to honor distinction. He came upon Hale staring silently at the remnants of the Panzer IV. "You did good," Mercer said softly. Hale shook his head. "Did good, Lieutenant. They were kids. All of them. And we just keep killing." Mercer had no words. There were no words that could reconcile the beauty of courage with the horror of necessity. He could only place a hand on Hale's shoulder, feeling the tremor in the young man's body. The night was thick and cold. Fires from destroyed tanks cast flickering shadows on their faces, illuminating fatigue and fear more clearly than any daylight could. Mercer thought of home again, of his family waiting somewhere in a world untouched by this relentless slaughter. He wondered if they would ever know the cost of the roads he traveled, the skies he scanned, the lives he saved at the expense of others. Then came the sound, distant, almost imperceptible. The rhythmic thump of engines against the wet earth. Another battalion, another German push. Mercer straightened. There was no rest in war, no time for mourning. Only the next engagement, the next mile, the next decision. "Lieutenant," Kellen said, voice low. "They're moving again, probably trying to cut off the supply line." Mercer nodded, feeling the weight of command settle deeper into his chest. "Prepare the men. Shermans in hull-down positions, mortars ready, infantry hold the hedgerows. We make them pay again." The moon emerged from behind a ragged cloud, casting pale silver light over the valley. Mercer watched it reflect off wet metal and shattered earth. He imagined it might be the same moon that shone over homes and families in America, oblivious to the carnage unfolding here. Hours passed. The Germans advanced, cautious at first, then more aggressively as night deepened. Mercer's battalion met them with a storm of fire, tanks and men working in brutal, choreographed unison. The hedgerows became killing grounds, the valley a theater of relentless violence. During a lull, Mercer climbed atop his Sherman, surveying the battlefield. Smoke mingled with mist, flames cast long, dancing shadows. He could see the tracks of every tank, the paths of retreating infantry, the scattered debris of destroyed machines. The math of war, once abstract and distant, was suddenly tangible. Every decision, every movement, every missed step accounted for in blood and fire. Caruso approached, face streaked with soot. "Lieutenant, how many more?" Mercer didn't answer immediately. He looked at the horizon, where the faint glimmer of dawn promised neither peace nor rest. "As many as it takes," he said finally, "until they can't come any more, until we can move forward without looking over our shoulders." The men returned to their stations, carrying the weight of exhaustion and fear, yet bound by a shared determination. Mercer climbed back into his Sherman, settled behind the controls, and felt the familiar vibration beneath his hands. The machine was more than metal. It was a lifeline, a shield, a weapon, a vessel through which courage and necessity flowed. The German advance renewed, just as the first rays of sun touched the horizon. Mercer's voice carried over the radio, calm but resolute. "Hold positions. Fire only when they're in range. Make every shot count. We are the shield here. We do not break." Through the mist and smoke, tanks rumbled forward, infantry surged, and Mercer's men met them with unwavering discipline. Shells screamed overhead, the earth trembled beneath each impact, and the valley became a crucible of resolve. By mid-morning, the German push had faltered. The valley remained in American hands, battered but not broken. Mercer sat atop his Sherman, chest heaving, eyes scanning the horizon. Each victory carried its own burden. Each life spared demanded another to pay the price elsewhere. He knew the war was far from over. The roads ahead would be longer, darker, and more treacherous. But for now, they had survived another night, another engagement, and that survival, fleeting, fragile, and hard-won, was a defiance against the chaos that threatened to consume them all. As Mercer looked at the rising sun breaking through the mist, he felt a rare flicker of hope. It was fragile, delicate, and almost absurd in the face of what lay before him, but it existed. And in war, hope, however small, was as lethal as any shell. He turned to his crew, Hale, Caruso, Kellen, all alive, all weary, all human. Mercer allowed himself a brief, imperceptible smile. "Let's keep moving, forward, 1 mile at a time." The Shermans rumbled forward, engines growling, tracks slicing through mud and debris. Behind them, the valley bore witness to their courage, to their losses, to their relentless drive. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and unforgiving, but Mercer and his men pressed on, always forward. And in that forward motion, in the heartbeat of machinery and men, the war continued, unyielding, unforgiving, and utterly human. The morning sun burned away the mist, revealing a landscape carved by artillery and despair. Fields once green were now churned to mud, dotted with the carcasses of tanks and the remnants of shattered villages. Mercer's battalion moved steadily forward, the Shermans like grim sentinels slicing through the grey, the men inside silent, absorbed in the rhythm of survival. Recon had spotted the German supply lines farther east, winding through dense forest and narrow roads. If Mercer could sever them, the enemy battalion would be stranded, their advance stalled. But it meant another push into unknown terrain, another dance with death. Mercer's mind was heavy with calculation. Maps spread before him in the command Sherman, marked with smudges of mud and charcoal. Every contour, every elevation mattered. The valley had taught him patience. The next engagement would demand precision. "Hale, Caruso, Kellen," Mercer said, eyes tracing a broken road ahead. "We're taking the ridge at grid 27. Enemy probably entrenched. Mortars, infantry, Sherman support. We hit fast, hit hard. Any hesitation, and we give them an opening, they'll exploit." Hale nodded, his jaw tight. "Understood, sir." Caruso adjusted his goggles, muttering, "I think I'm getting used to this hell." Mercer allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Used to it, maybe, but hell never gets easy." They moved out. The ridge loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the rising sun. Mercer could see smoke curling from distant machine gun nests, a warning of the defenses waiting for them. Every foot forward was a risk, every turn of the tracks a gamble. The first shots rang out before they even reached the base of the ridge. Machine guns rattled, bullets striking mud and metal, the sound deafening in the enclosed valley. Mercer's Sherman returned fire, the cannon screaming in defiance, sending German positions into clouds of splintered earth. Hale's hands worked with precision, the shelling almost artistic in its timing. Caruso targeted machine gun nests, one after another, the explosions sending plumes of dirt and smoke into the sky. Kellen coordinated infantry fire, directing men through hedgerows and shell craters, every movement choreographed to inflict maximum damage while minimizing exposure. A Panzer IV rolled out from the ridge's flank, and Mercer's chest tightened. Its barrel was trained on the lead Sherman, poised to end the moment with a single, devastating shot. Hale fired instinctively, the shell connecting perfectly, toppling the tank into a crater, its tracks twisting like broken limbs. Mercer exhaled slowly. They survived. Again. The ridge was tougher than anticipated. Snipers picked off men from hidden positions, and mines planted in the mud slowed their advance to a crawl. Mercer's unit had to dismount. Men crawling through mud, suppressing fire exchanged with enemies who seemed to materialize from the trees themselves. Hours passed. Mercer felt the ache of fatigue in his bones, the weight of command pressing harder with each casualty. Yet, through the fog of battle, small victories emerged. A minefield neutralized, a bunker destroyed, a squad of Germans captured rather than killed. Their fear mirrored in the young faces of his men. The human cost of victory was visible, unavoidable. By afternoon, the battalion reached the crest. The ridge was theirs, but at a price. Shermans were damaged, some immobilized, and the infantry was down a third of its numbers. Mercer walked among the men, offering terse words of encouragement, acknowledging their losses without sentimentality, because sentimentality had no place here. He found Hale kneeling beside a fallen comrade, trying to staunch a wound. Mercer placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did all you could," he said softly. Hale's face was pale, streaked with dirt and blood, but he nodded. "I know, sir. I just hate this." Mercer didn't respond. There were no words that could undo what they had seen. Only the next objective awaited. The supply line lay just beyond the ridge, winding through a narrow defile surrounded by forest. Mercer's plan was to strike quickly, using the ridge for artillery advantage, then cut off the Germans before they could regroup. But reconnaissance reports warned of heavier armor and fresh infantry units waiting in ambush. As they approached the defile, Mercer's gut twisted. The Germans had anticipated their move. Panther tanks lurked among the trees, their barrels gleaming, ready to unleash fire. Infantry was entrenched in bunkers, camouflage blending almost seamlessly with the foliage. The ambush was deadly. "Hold," Mercer ordered, gripping the radio. "We don't rush. Observe, plan, strike." The next hour became a tense standoff. Mercer counted tanks, calculated angles, listened to the distant hum of engines, the rustle of trees, the muted cries of men. Every detail mattered. One misstep could cost them the ridge and the valley below. And then came the first shot. The Panther fired, the shell landing near a Sherman, throwing mud and debris into the air. Hale responded instantly, adjusting aim. The cannon thundering in reply. Explosions cascaded through the trees, smoke rising like dark banners. Mercer's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed danger, yet every decision had to be calculated. The ambush was brutal, but the ridge gave them a line of sight advantage. Sherman after Sherman engaged. Artillery pounded the forest. Infantry flanked through cover. The Germans fought fiercely, but Mercer's coordination began to turn the tide. Hours blurred into chaos. Mercer felt the pull of exhaustion, every nerve raw from the intensity. Caruso's voice cracked over the radio. "They keep coming. Another Panther on the left." Hale fired again, the shell striking true, destroying the Panther and sending its crew scrambling. Kellen coordinated the infantry, pushing through a bunker line, silencing rifles and grenades with ruthless efficiency. The forest became a graveyard for enemy armor and entrenched soldiers alike. By evening, the defile was theirs. The supply line severed. Mercer stood atop the ridge, surveying the battlefield below. German vehicles were smoking hulks, infantry scattered, the road impassable. They had struck decisively. Yet Mercer knew the victory was temporary. The war was not measured in single battles, but in endurance, in relentless pursuit, in surviving long enough to fight another day. Hale approached, still breathing heavily, dirt and blood streaking his face. "We did it, sir." Mercer shook his head. "We survived. That's what we did. Survival is all that matters right now." Caruso limped over, grinning through grime. "I think I might actually get used to this." Mercer allowed himself a rare laugh, dry and fleeting. "Just remember, hell never gets easy." Night fell, and the men huddled near fires, the cold biting through uniforms. But no one spoke of fear, only strategy, only movement, only what came next. Because in war, hope was fleeting, and tomorrow was never promised. Mercer sat quietly, listening to the wind rustle through the broken trees, the distant moans of the wounded carried on the night air. He thought of the families waiting somewhere, of the streets untouched by war, of the young men who would not see another sunrise. And yet, amidst the horror, there was pride. Pride in survival, in skill, in courage that refused to bend even when the world seemed determined to break them. He tightened his grip on the radio, eyes scanning the horizon. More battles awaited, more roads to claim, more miles to cover. The war stretched endlessly, but for now, they had held the ridge. Mercer whispered to himself, almost a vow. Forward, always forward. The Shermans rumbled softly, men settled for rest, fires flickering in the sky. Wind, the ridge, standing as a testament to resolve. The valley, scarred and battered, remained in their hands, a fragile victory against the unyielding tide of war. And somewhere in that darkness, somewhere beyond the horizon, the next challenge waited, and Mercer would meet it, as he always had, with eyes wide open, hands steady, and heart hardened by both loss and unwavering determination. The night deepened, and with it the fragile hope that survival had sown. But Mercer knew. Hope was a weapon as sharp as any cannon, and tomorrow they would wield it again. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bells so you don't miss any upload from us.